Alrighty, so here is the beginning of part 2 for our chapter on self-confidence. So now what we're going to do, since you guys kind of have, or hopefully have, an idea of what self-confidence in sport looks like, we're going to talk about some different elements of this, okay? So expectations are also important to consider in light of what self-confidence is, your belief of how well you can perform some task or some behavior. Now, of course, expectations are going to be important, right? Especially when we're trying to change behavior, but also just in any performance of a behavior. So if we have some positive outlook or some idea of success in producing the behavior or the effect, it's actually going to link to a positive outcome often. I mean, clearly there are some elements that are going to be outside the person's control. But overall, kind of generally speaking, if you believe you have some positive expectations, it usually links well to sport performance. Okay, so the idea here is the expectation of beating a tough opponent or someone you've never beaten or doing a really difficult task can produce exceptional performance, right? So it's kind of that underdog mentality, and as you start to overcome some psychological barriers, some of that negative self-talk or negative expectations, you start to see some snowball effect here and some positive performances being produced. Also, of course, coaches and teachers, the expectations of others are going to influence an athlete or an exerciser's performance as well. Okay. And I think that's pretty straightforward, right? So these social agents, these people in our social environment, their expectations are really going to change how we feel and then ultimately how we perform, okay? And this generally occurs in 4 stages, or their expectations do, okay? So we'll stick with coaches here. So the first stage, coaches form their expectations really based on that first impression, right? Which makes sense. So it's going to be personal cues. So someone's gender, race, body size, whatever it might be. But then also they'll probably have some information about their performance, maybe on skills tests or how they act at tryouts or practices, that kind of thing. So kind of an easy example here is if we have a girl that's 6'1", a coach might assume that they're a basketball player or a volleyball player and not a gymnast. Okay, and the problem occurs here when a coach's expectations are inaccurate, right? So maybe they have this high expectation that this girl that I just talked about would be a phenomenal basketball player, but she's never played basketball. Okay, so that you can see how these are going to conflict with one another. The next stage, the coach's expectations influence their behavior. So the coach's behavior regarding stuff like their frequency of quality coaching, right? So how much they interact with an athlete, the quantity and quality of those interactions and instruction that they're giving to the athlete, and then also the type and frequency of feedback that they're giving to the athlete. So breaking these down a little bit more, so let's stick with that same example of the girl that the coach assumes is a basketball player or a volleyball player. They really might not, if this is the girl's first time ever playing basketball or trying out for basketball, they might not give them much instruction on playing the post or how to rebound because they just assume they're going to be good at this because they're so tall. So that's going to limit the amount of interactions. When they do interact, maybe the coach isn't giving them a lot of good critique or good information that they can learn from. And then also because they assume some behavior is going to happen, they just might not give a lot of feedback, right? It might be that stuff like the pat on the back. Okay, and the next stage, the coach's behaviors affect an athlete's performance, okay, by causing maybe some low expectations for performances. So you can think of this as if the coach isn't interacting with the athlete very much, then that might lead to some lower perception by the athlete of worth or even expectancy to perform, that kind of thing, because they're not getting reinforcement. And then they're not getting better, so maybe their playing time is going to go down, If their playing time goes down, then they're going to be less confident, and then they might start attributing their lack of playing time because they're not good at the sport, they have low ability, that kind of thing. So you can kind of see that a coach's expectation here can really have quite a domino effect, not only on the coach's behavior, but then also the athlete's perception and ultimately their mindset about the sport. In the last stage, maybe the athlete's performance is going to confirm the coach's original expectations. Okay, so the performance results then feed back into stage 1. And this might seem a little counterintuitive, but the thinking here is if the coach had doubts or had really low expectations of their athlete, and then the athlete goes and performs, then that's going to confirm the coach's original expectation and such, and that performance then leads into informing the coach's original expectations of the athlete. Because remember, some of the initial expectations that the coach is going to form is based on some kind of feedback, maybe seen or performance, so seeing the athlete do a task. Now, if an athlete is doing very well at the sport, then again, maybe this is going to confirm the coach's mindset and expectations. So if that girl does extremely well at volleyball or very well at basketball, then the coach might use that information maybe for the next season to inform their expectations for the athlete's second year in the sport. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about self-efficacy, because this is actually a really big area in sport and exercise psych. And this is the perception of one's ability to perform a task successfully. And I know that sounds basically identical to self-confidence, but the difference is usually with self-confidence we're talking about, when we say a task, we're talking about, or performance, we're talking about something a bit bigger, right? So we might be talking about playing basketball, performing a cartwheel in general. These larger skills, whereas self-efficacy is really like block by block, very closed skills. So it might be for the basketball player their self-efficacy of free throw shooting, their self-efficacy of three-point shooting, as opposed to their confidence in shooting ability. Okay, so the really important part here is the situation-specific element. So why is this stuff important? Why do we need to talk about this specific form of self-confidence? Well, this is all based out of a researcher named Bandura. He came up with self-efficacy, and actually here in the department, Dr. Deborah Feltz does a lot of work that deals with self-efficacy, and so an individual's belief that they can do a task. So given sufficient skill and motivation, we can expect that performance is going to depend on an individual's self-expectancy belief, right? So maybe some performance on a small task, let's just stick with free throw shooting, is going to really depend on, well, if we know they have the skill for it, we know they have the motivation for it, but do they believe that they can actually do this stuff? Okay, so what this is going to do is it's going to affect an athlete's choice of task. It's going to change the level of effort that they're going to put in, and then also it might change how persistent they are when they're faced with some form of adversity, right? Because if they think they can't do it off the bat, then they're probably not going to be very persistent in their pursuit. So this can be generalized to similar skills as well as situations. So again, it might be something like a closed skill. So when we talk about free throws, there might be some self-efficacy beliefs about free throws, that because three-point shooting is also somewhat of it's a shooting task, maybe there's some link or some bleeding over of our efficacy beliefs. Okay, this is also related to things like goal setting, worrying, and then also attribution. So what we attribute our performances to. So this was a table in your textbook. We're going to go over each part here, but again, notice the name. This is adapted from Dr. Feltz, who's here in the department. So if this is something that really interests you, you'd want to seek her out, and she could give you some more information. So what are some sources of efficacy? Well, clearly your past performance is going to directly um, relate to your efficacy beliefs. If you have done something well in the past, you probably have some belief that you'll do well at it again in the future. There's also vicarious experiences, so this is like modeling, right? So if we're able to watch someone that we think is similar to us do well at a task, then we're probably going to have some beliefs that we can do it well too. There's also verbal persuasion, which is pretty straightforward. It's just when other people, so coaches, teachers, peers, family members, whatever it might be, actually enhance our feelings of efficacy. There's also imaginal experiences, or imaginal, however you want to pronounce that. So this is when an individual actually does some visualization, and they're able to generate their beliefs based on how they can imagine themselves doing a task, or maybe imagining how others would do a task. Okay. Then we have physiological states. So this deals with how a person interprets how their body reacts to certain situations, right? So if an individual starts to feel their heart beating extremely fast and it just seems to be pounding in their chest, if the person interprets that as fear or kind of fright or worry or something like that, then it's probably not going to enhance the person's self-efficacy in that task. But if they interpret that as, wow, I'm really excited to take advantage of this situation, of this opportunity to perform, then it might actually enhance their self-perception, because they might interpret these signals from their body as a way of letting them know, hey, this is important and I'm ready for this task. And that can be really tricky to shift an athlete's mindset to taking some of these physiological markers or instances and making them more positive. Okay? Then there's emotional states or moods. Of course, how we're feeling, it could be a source of efficacy as well. So while we've been talking about athlete efficacy there, right, so we're talking about performances, there are other individuals that can actually utilize efficacy as well. So what about coaches? Okay, so this deals with a coach's belief that they have the capacity to affect the learning and performance of their athletes. Okay, so the components of coaching efficacy are going to deal with, do they believe they can come up with good game strategy, something that's going to help their athletes perform? Do they believe they can motivate their team or their athlete? Can they give adequate feedback and instruction on technique? And what about the intangible things in sports? So are they providing opportunities for character building, life skill development, these kind of things? And these are all elements found in coaching efficacy. Now there's also this idea of team efficacy, or generally it's called collective efficacy, right? So this is the idea of most sports are played on a team basis, right? So we could think of the team's belief in how they could perform a task, okay? Now this is a little bit different than the sum of every individual athlete, because now we're talking about the athlete's belief in their teammates, okay? So it's the team as a whole. So you can think about how the sum of individual scores might be different than the belief in how all of these individuals interact and how the team performs itself. So some sources of self-efficacy, team efficacy, could be things like group cohesion, so how close-knit the team is, do they all get along? What about what's the motivational climate that's found with the team? So are they task-oriented? Are they more about development and having fun? Or are they more focused on winning and demonstrating that they are better than their opponents? And then lastly, there's this idea of leader effectiveness and confidence. So do we have strong leaders? Do we have leaders that are actually communicating between the team and the coach? Are they good at picking up on what's going on with the team and addressing the team's needs. So these are some core elements, in addition to, of course, those self-efficacy elements that are going to enhance the whole team's belief in how they can perform a task. And of course, if you believe in your team, right, if you have this high level of trust and efficacy or collective efficacy, that's going to relate directly to performance, because we can think of the alternative, right? If I'm on a soccer team and I don't believe my team's very good, then overall the team performance probably isn't going to be optimal, because all of a sudden you have people playing for themselves and maybe blaming the team for not doing well, or blaming other factors in the sport, as opposed to having some kind of belief that, you know what, I need to focus on my performance because my team will do exceptionally well in today's match, or whatever it might be. So how do we go about building that, right? So it's one thing to have it, but it's not always present in every team. So what the team should do is, before a competition, you want to develop perceptions collectively as a group about the capabilities and the fitness to manage the upcoming competition, right? So this is the benefit of having two-a-days as a team, of having team workouts, of going on team building trips. So it's really this idea of the team is able to see how everyone performs and has some trust in every athlete's capabilities for a match. But then there's also during competition, so this can be a little bit tricky, but you need to get the team to focus on believing in one another, okay? As opposed to believing in just yourself. Now, it's important for them to be confident in their own abilities, but also having some trust built throughout the team is going to be extremely important. But then also we should think about, what about after the competition? Okay, so this is where it's helpful to develop some intra-team, so that means within the team, interpretations of experiences of the game. So this shouldn't really be done immediately after a game. If a team loses a game, you don't want to hop on the bus to head home and start hashing it out, right? So how did we feel? Do you guys like each other? Did you do a great job at this or that? Because that's when emotions are usually high. People might be frustrated, that kind of thing. So giving the athletes a day or two to digest their performance as a whole could be helpful here, and then sitting down with the team and saying, all right, where were our shortcomings? Where did we excel? And that's usually really important, because it's really easy to highlight what you don't do well, but a lot of times we overlook things that have gone well in a performance. All right, that's the end of part 2 and the end of self-confidence. So this is the end of Module 2, so this is all the material for our first exam, and also there is not a 4-point activity that goes along with self-confidence. All right, so start studying for that exam. Thanks, guys.